Wow, 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 wow.
Ready? You're not. All right, hit that red button, Kyle. And we're live. Yep. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of the Two Tongues podcast where we're hanging out with the Scotsman.
All right.
So I want to welcome Ross Hyslop. Is that right? Did I say that right?
You got it.
To the podcast. I'll tell the audience that the story here is an interesting one. So Ross is a longtime listener of the show and has been very gracious in interacting with us on social media and just being a friend of the podcast. And then out of the blue, he tells me he's going to be visiting the States to attend his goddaughter's
my goddaughter's engagement party
in sunny Florida, and decided to make the trip to Cleveland to visit Kyle and I. So we're super duper excited about it. Ross is a charming man. He charmed Aunt Linda in no time flat when he came over to visit, and that's where we are. So we just wanted to jump on here and immortalize this conversation for everybody. What else, Kyle?
I don't know, man. It's exciting. Things are, things are out of order. We're sitting in different places. I feel like maybe you should try to like scoot closer towards me or something.
Yeah, I could try.
Cuddling boys get the heat.
I also would like to try to figure out like what happens if I click on this. No, I don't want to hide it on stream, but I would like to
Switch what you see.
Yeah. Probably not the best time to figure this out, but
Nope.
Whatever.
Yeah. Oh, damn it. So you got me all fumbled here. So this isn't the normal cadence, obviously. Usually it's Kyle and I with some idea of what we're going to talk about. I can't get any closer to you. This is it. But in this case, we're just going to wing it with Ross here. So I don't know where to start. So I'm just going to say we had a conversation last night over dinner. We had a conversation upstairs for like the last hour. So we've talked about just anything and everything. There's a couple things that I want to dive into deeper with you that we talked about yesterday. So I'll just tell the audience the things that stuck out for me when we were getting to know one another is Ross's experience with natives in, is it Canada or Alaska?
Canada.
So the native people in Canada introduced to shamanism and traveling to India and having some pretty intense experiences there. That sort of blew me away hearing that from you yesterday, so we can talk about that. But before we do, I want to ask you, what do I want to ask you? What stands out in your memory about the podcast? Episodes that you've listened to, anything in particular that sticks in your mind when if somebody should ask you about the Two Tongues podcast, what is it that you're going to tell them?
Your ability to bring difficult questions, explaining them simply through your lens, is very relatable. It's a relatable podcast for me anyway. And episodes that I've listened to, well, I only learned on the way up from Florida to Ohio that I have only started listening to you from S3E44. 29, yeah. And so when I was looking back at all the ones that were played, I saw that there was actually 28 episodes prior to when I started listening to you that I haven't yet listened to. So I'm up to date. I was a bit concerned that I wouldn't be. I've been really ingesting your podcasts in the last week because I knew I was coming over. It was all short notice, but here we are. And what I said to you last night was when I started listening to you, it was almost like it was like hearing your own internal dialogue, your own internal thoughts that you don't perhaps share with the world, being reflected through another voice. And that's what got me hooked, because I've been pretty much intravenously listening to you consistently for the last year.
That is sincerely one of the best compliments that I can imagine. So I thank you for that, Ross. That's amazing. like I said, I tried to explain this to you yesterday. I feel like I'm screaming into the void down here sometimes. Got a bunch of things that I want to say, a bunch of things that I'm interested in exploring, and you have to talk to think. I could do it if I'm talking, and I can do it if I'm writing, because it's kind of the same thing, like a dialogue back and forth with myself. But and I told you, there's not a lot of people in my life that give two shits about any of this stuff, so I don't get the chance to think about it, and that's kind of all I want to do. Like I'm passionate about this stuff, so all I want to do is think about it. You know, there's no end to that for me, and again, because nobody wants to have that conversation, I come down here and I have it with myself, or I have it with Kyle, who's obligated based on 35 years of friendship,
Long ass time,
to listen to every goddamn word I have to say.
I enjoy it.
But then hearing you say that it sounded like your own internal dialogue, and you're like, finally somebody's saying it, and saying it in a way that helps me to make sense of it. I just can't tell you how like sincerely that is a compliment to me. I told you this last night, but I'm telling you, everyone who's listening, it sort of justifies the work, the effort that I'm putting into it. Just to know that there's somebody out there that it's been meaningful to, even if it's just one person, even if it's just you, man, it's worth it. Because up until yesterday, it felt like maybe it was into the void.
Isn't that the most important thing, though? If we can just touch one person in our life, we don't have to. I think people think things have to be big. It has to be that you've got to have mass coverage. But if you can just touch one person and get one person to think differently or change the way that they're living for the better, it's worth doing it.
So I already feel that way based on the conversation we had 20 minutes ago. I feel like some of the stuff we were talking about upstairs about spirits and marijuana in particular are things that I feel motivated to do something about, having had that conversation with you. So it's going both ways. It's going both ways.
It's good to be here. It's good to meet you in person.
The intro to the podcast better than I do. I listen to it every time we do it, and I don't know it that well, man. That's impressive.
I'll tell you, one of the best things about this experience, you coming over to visit, was when you came downstairs into my basement, which, by the way, is it's an unfinished basement. It's like walking into a
dungeon.
To a dungeon. Yeah, it's not pretty. You walk down the steps and open up the door to the podcast studio, and the smile on Ross's face, it was like a kid going to Disneyland or something. It's like something that you've seen a million times, and the idea that you were here, I could just see the joy, and it was just tremendous, man. It's tremendous.
What an opportunity, really. But it's like, if we don't take them, we'll never see them, really. And I use that analogy a lot with work and things like that as well. It's like, how many red cars did we pass on the way here today? Do you know?
A handful, I would assume.
Okay, but do you know that for true?
It might not have been a single one. It's a possibility.
But if I were to give you $10 for every red car before we left,
I would have been counting.
Absolutely.
Red car.
Absolutely. And it's like, how many opportunities do we see on a daily basis that we don't take advantage of? And only being an hour and 54 minutes away from you, I had to take that opportunity and your hospitality to allow me to be here. It's just incredible. And it really is. I think, as we spoke last night, we'll never know. Do we need to know what this might be? Just a one-off thing. I go back to Scotland, you go back about your business.
Yeah.
That's it. It is what it is.
And if that's the case, it's every bit as valuable as if this becomes a lifelong friendship, which I hope it does. Ross. I hope it does, man.
But there was never an agenda for that. It was just, let's connect. In a world where we're more connected than ever before, there's actually no real connections.
Absolutely.
So to sit across the table from Kyle last night and look him in the eye and say, you've changed my life, and you've helped me think better. You've allowed me. You've drawn me to make a journey to meet you through a podcast that's been done in, your basement.
And you doing that, you having the interest in being willing to come, has had, my involvement with the podcast has dropped over the past few months just because I've been going through some stuff, and it, just like makes you think about things differently when you have something happen like your mom dying. It throws a wrench into the gears, So my involvement in the podcast has been, not as much. This is the third one back.
Yep.
So it definitely, knowing that we had that kind of effect on you, definitely makes me want to do it more,
100%.
for sure.
Great.
So
That's great.
yeah, man.
Isn't it?
Absolutely.
So here's the thing, Ross. We did a bunch of getting to know you stuff already, and I'm sure there's a ton more we could do, and maybe the audience would prefer that. But I want to open it up to you. Listen, I listen to lots of podcasts. I never, ever, ever have had or can imagine having the opportunity to do what you're doing, where I'm sitting down with Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan or somebody like that and asking them questions. And you have them, right? You're listening to episodes and there's something you want to say, or there's a question you have, or do that. So is there anything like that you will want to ask about or, clarify or, anything like that?
So with yourself, Chris,
Mhm.
you articulate yourself very well. You're a good speaker. I know that you joke with them about being a preacher and that you were going to, but it was so fast, and it was I listened to maybe 2 or 3 episodes at a time because I'm out walking the dogs for 3 hours at the weekend or what have you. So 2 episodes might go, and having the foresight to go back the way. But am I right to say that you described it as like a failed PhD student? You were going to do your PhD and life got in the way. What got in the way?
Oh, so when you listen to the first 28 episodes, you may hear that story, but I'll tell you it's been a while. So my whole life I don't know how to describe this other than to say fascinated with the idea of God. My mom tells a story when I was a little boy, like 5 years old. There was a preacher on the TV, I don't know if you have this in Scotland, but on the weekends there's like a couple of evangelical preachers that have big programs in big churches, and people who can't go, they'll have them on television. And so one of these things was on TV, and my mom comes into the living room, and I have my hand on the television because the preacher invited the audience to pray with him. The preacher told me, as I'm sitting there in my living room, to come put my hand on the television screen and pray with him. And I think about this like I was a naive kid. I was just a kid. I was 5 years old. There was an authority figure on TV who was compelling, and he told me to do it, so I did it. My mom comes in and she sees her little 5-year-old boy with his hand on the TV praying with a televangelist, and so she tells this story like it's some sort of foreshadowing of my relationship with God, or what my future was going to hold. Like my mom and my grandma maybe toyed with the idea that I might be a preacher, which is something we talked about on the podcast, and I laughed about.
He is a preacher.
But when you said that to me, you were like, "What? You are a preacher." Then I realized you've got a point. So it's been around as long as I can remember, this interest in God. And when I started going to school, even before college, when I was in the last couple of years of high school, I got fascinated by trying to compare religions, trying to understand them and compare them. And I was interested in every religion that wasn't mine. I wanted to learn about everything, but I didn't give a shit about Christianity. I didn't want to dig into it. I thought I had it all understood. What I wanted to learn about was Hinduism, Buddhism. I wanted to learn about that stuff. So I started doing a bunch of reading in high school about flood myths and how they appear everywhere. They appear in India, they appear in China, they appear in Greece, they appear everywhere. Just like the Noah story. And I couldn't believe it. I thought, there must be an explanation for that. What is the explanation? Are all these religions borrowing from each other? Did they all come from a single source? And these stories diverge as time goes on? Like, what's the explanation for that? I used to work at a movie theater. Kyle worked there with me for a time. But you'd imagine I'm like a 16, 17-year-old kid at the movie theater. And when during the down times, I'm reading mythologies of world religions, ancient mythologies. And I'm comparing, there's the god of thunder over here, the god of the sky. And then I'm comparing that figure to all the other gods of thunder and gods of the sky and trying to find some thread that connects them. those are the kind of things I was doing. And then I had a class in college, just a comparative religion class early in college, that just kind of put it over the top for me. The professor's name was Tim Davis. I just sent him an email not long ago, just after more than a decade, sent him an email just to thank him for the influence that he was. I never received a response. I don't know if he ever got the message, but it made a big impact on me. So at the time, I was engaged to be married to a girl I met in high school, a friend of mine in high school. I told you a little bit about this yesterday. She had a child from a mutual friend of ours, and we started dating. My family wasn't thrilled about that, but I'm a teenage boy. I'm going to do what I want. So we dated for a while, and when we got married, I had to decide: do I continue in school? If that means that I have to go to graduate school, where I'll be dedicated to, basically a full-time job just in schoolwork, maybe even more than a full-time job just in schoolwork. How am I going to afford to take care of her and her child, family? My family. That's how I thought about it at the time. So I just had to make a choice. And I guess I chased the money. I made that choice. I made what maybe was the wrong choice, but in retrospect, it all worked out. I'm not upset about my decision, but I could have continued right through, got my master's in my doctorate. Instead, I went into finance. And I got a job, and I took care of business. And then that whole marriage fell apart. And I told you a little bit about that yesterday. I haven't seen the daughter that I helped raise. I haven't seen her she's like 22 years old. I haven't seen her since she was 11, So I made a big sacrifice for something that didn't pan out. And I'm not really sore about it. Maybe it sounds like I am right now, but I took a different path, and I'll tell you why I think it might be for the best. Because at the time, I didn't know what it really was about the idea of God that I was so fascinated about. Like, I thought I was going to go to school for theology. And I talked to Professor Davis. Mentioned him a minute ago, and he told me, it sounds to me like you want to study psychology. And I thought to him at the time, that was laughable. I thought, what I'm interested in is God. I want to know, that was my phone. I want to know what that means, that word, and you're telling me that I should study psychology? Like, where's the connection? And I didn't ask him. I just shied away from it. And now it's come full circle, where it turns out that psychology has a huge role in how we conceptualize God, how we understand our relationship to God. How can you understand what a human's relationship is to an abstraction if you don't understand human psychology? How could you understand? And I wanted to know what the origin of the idea of God, who came up with that idea, and why? Like, where did it come from? What experience did a caveman have in the Neolithic or the Paleolithic? What experience did they have that made them think there must be a spirit that connects us? There must be a life after death. Where did that come from? It's fascinating to me. So now I've taken that path. Now I'm studying Carl Jung. I'm studying Jordan Peterson. I'm studying people like Mircea Eliade, and I'm that's more directly what I'm interested in. And I don't think I ever would have got there if I would have went to school for theology. Would I have ever got there? I don't know. On top of that, the environment of the college, the university environment, is the most toxic place today that I can imagine. And when I think to myself, you might be a tenured professor or trying to become a tenured professor in this environment, and that would be the rest of your life. The rest of your life dealing with all this craziness. And I feel like I dodged a bullet in some ways. And that's all I have to say about that.
So you're in your opinion scholarship is your PhD now, and that's it, and that brings you joy, and can see how lit up you get when you talk about it and listen to your podcast. The energy comes through the headphones, and how excited you are. And it's a great connection with the two of you. It's great to hear.
Yeah, it's and you probably noticed this, but there's a different dynamic if it's just me or if it's me and Kyle. And I love that Kyle brings that component to the podcast. And when you weren't coming, last thing I wanted to do was tell you I wanted you to come back.
Sure.
Last thing I wanted to do was put some other obligation on your plate. But like, I missed you, man. Like I wanted to have those conversations with you. And Kyle does things like pushes back on me, which I don't do to myself, right? When I'm doing my solo podcast, nobody says, wait a minute, that might be bullshit. Kyle always does, and I appreciate that.
I can't help myself, man. I'm just a contrarian. Even if I agree, sometimes I find myself like, I just want to like find the holes. You know what I mean? Just try to squirrel them out. But we also, we talk about some of the stuff that you talk about in your solos when we're together, but we talk about a lot of different stuff too.
Yeah.
Like you've done a few solos that are talking about more cultural, political, sociological things, but a lot of times you're more in the psychological, the spiritual, that realm.
Even that was a fascinating thing for me to learn, that the word psyche means soul. So when we use the word mind mostly. When somebody says mind, that what they mean, even though they don't know it, is soul. That's amazing. That's something I feel like we've lost.
We've lost our soul.
We've lost our soul. Yeah. Lost touch with it.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
So
sorry.
No, you go ahead.
No, it's just.
So you found our podcast. I found this out yesterday through the Sacred Mushroom and the Cross episode, which is far and away our most popular episode still. And you kind of confirmed my theory for why it is our most popular episode. And how did you stumble upon it again?
So I was working with ethnogens and looking at the psychotherapeutic value of ethnogens. And I was wanting to listen to the book.
Because you do a lot of walking.
And I do a lot of walking. It seemed easy, and I just kind of clicked it into Spotify, and I didn't really look at who was hosting it. I thought it was an audiobook, and it turned out it was a podcast with Kyle and Chris.
Yes, indeed.
And that was it. And then one podcast became. So how many after that? I don't know. How many?
It's got to be at least a couple of hundred, right?
It's got to.
And they're not short
That's
episodes.
Wild. No, they're 2 hours long.
Yeah.
I've listened to every one.
God bless you, man.
It's amazing. And it just keeps playing, doesn't it? You just keep walking, and it's into the intro, and then it's into the exit, and into the intro, and into the exit. And it just fractally keeps moving as I'm walking. So that was where I got on it, got on the kick. And then it just got you hooked. Like, I find myself getting edgy and craving to get out and get those headphones in and listen. Like, I need more.
Good.
It's great.
I feel that way. There's many times I feel that way. And the idea that somebody feels that way about my podcast is blowing my mind, man. It's blowing my mind.
It's great.
Like my wife gets upset because a lot of times I'll have one headphone. I'll just have one in my ear, and I'll be doing chores around the house, or I'll be like giving the kids a bath, and I have a podcast playing. And she thinks, it may be fairly sometimes, that I'm not present because I'm always listening to it. But it's like, and that again, there's probably some truth to that.
Yes.
But I'm so eager to listen to it. I want to finish it that I find myself doing that.
Yeah, we get hooked in, don't we? Yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. It's great, and it's I think for anybody listening and hearing this, the possibilities of, like, I told a couple of people that I was looking at coming out, just randoms that I walk the dog with, and they said something like along the lines of, it's amazing. It's these two probably just regular guys, probably doing a podcast in their basement, and I'm like, no, they're not regular guys, and it's not in their basement. It's like proper recording studio stuff. Don't insult these guys. And the power of the internet, and the connections that can be made, and reaching out. I don't even use Twitter, but I found that your platform's Twitter, and that's where you said, if you're following us, say hi on Twitter. Oh, right, they're on Twitter. I better go and check them out. And I lit up a Twitter account so that I could come and converse with you. And I don't know what it was that was drawing me to come here. It sounds a little bit psycho-spiritual in itself, but I just knew I had to meet you, and I didn't know why, and I don't need to know why. And I was in a position, I'm fortunate to be in a position to be able to do that. And as we were talking about last night, the ripple effect, if you like, of throwing that stone into the water of coming, and the effect that that's not only going to have on any of the three of us in this room, but the effect that it's going to have on us all moving forward. Now, it might be nothing. It might be something. We don't need to know that. But if we never, we'll miss 100% of the shots we don't take.
Yeah, exactly.
Totally. We're going to miss 100% of the shots we don't take. And if you were to equate it to a financial figure of what it's cost or the energy that it took to come here, it's like if someone was really, really struggling, would I give them that figure with no strings? Absolutely. 100%. But just, there you go. Get yourself back up on your feet.
Mm.
And I think it's paying respect to yourself. So I'm paying respect to myself by seeing this journey out.
Mm.
It's going to have a different fall, different, and it's going to be you, Chris. And we'll never know until we make the connection of what's going to come of it. But there's no agenda. It's just do something because it feels that you want to do it. I wanted to come here. I said that straight off. I said that to Alison when I started listening. I said, I want to meet these guys. These guys are incredible. And, you talk about Joe Rogan and Jordan Peterson. I don't listen to Jordan Peterson. I've maybe listened to a couple of things that he said. I've noticed that when I first listened to him, I found him very right wing. Mm. And then I kind of went, something's changed in his delivery. I'm wondering if his PA has said, you're going to have to come back a bit to left to centre a little bit. And I did find him a little bit more palatable. Joe Rogan, I've never listened to a full podcast with Joe Rogan. You guys have been the only podcast that I've really indulged myself in and lathered myself up in daily. And I get a lot out of it. And, I'm going to get something out of being here with you and us actually making that connection in person. And it's like throwing the intention out and then just letting it go. And it's like coming here and, like we were speaking last night and I goes, it must be, it's wild for me being here is what it must be for you. And he went, yeah, like I've told some guys at work and like, what if this guy's a mass murderer and he's going to take you away and put you in the trunk of your car?
It's like he's not really Scottish. He's not really traveling from overseas.
Yeah,
he knows everything about you and is going to kill you. Yeah.
And that fear narrative holds us back, doesn't it?
It does.
It absolutely does.
That's what's so impressive about your decision to come here. Like, I don't know if we were talking about this or if it was the last time Kyle and I recorded, but one of the things I mentioned is that I like to see live music. And as I get older, I do it less, And one of the things that's happened is I bought tickets for me and my wife to go see some show. And then when the time comes, we're like, we don't want to go. So we just don't go. We just waste the tickets. And sometimes it's laziness or just whatever. We're tired. We had a longer week than we anticipated. We got other things on our plate, and we just decide not to do it. And that's just an example of how easy it is not to do something. And,
yes.
And when I met you, the first thing I said to you was, I appreciate you coming because I know it was a sacrifice. It cost you money to come here. It cost you time to come here. It was an inconvenience. You're not here in the States to do this. So, there was all kinds of opportunities for you to say, it's not worth it. And you still came,
But it's those two opposing forces. I think that's the way I see it. We've got these two opposing forces inside of us that are contradicting each other all the time. And one force has got an agenda for us not moving towards growth and expansion and completion and connection. Why would it want us to do that? It's got a stranglehold on us. And, my hobby's climbing mountains. We might talk about that, we might not, but I sit at the top of mountains and I look at them and I think it's been those two opposing forces somewhere where the tectonic plates have connected, they've hit, and the power that they've hit each other at depicts how high up they're going to go. Yeah, and those two opposing forces live within us, and it becomes almost too easy to give in to the part that doesn't want us to grow, that doesn't want us to move forward, that doesn't want us to have connection, that wants us to stay in isolation, that wants us to stay in our house, that wants us to not go out and not grow exponentially.
So, okay, what is the thing in us that wants that for us? Because it sounds to me like we're talking about the devil. It sounds to me like we're talking about a malignant spirit, and it's just a part of us, and we have to constantly contend with it. It's the old 1950s Looney Tune cartoons where the little devil's on one shoulder and the little angel's on the other. What is that thing in us? Can it be conquered?
I think you used the word devil. I would agree with that. I would say it's a great way to describe it. I think that if we look at it, but until having a conversation about this stuff, looking at it through the lens of duality is very, very difficult. It's like, for me, it's attempting to protect us somewhere. It's like, you don't want to do that. So there is a part of protection involved in it, but very, very quickly that protection can become incarcerating. And yes, if we look at it through a lens of Luciferianism or, self-service, I described it as a client to a client a couple of weeks ago. Guy comes in and he's clearly involved in underworld activities.
Ooh.
And I said to him, he's dancing on the wrong side of the law, let's say. And I thought, I've got to explain this to him because, he's going to walk out of here and not come back. And I want this guy to get some healing and some growth. So I said to him, if you imagine that you're selling 5 kilos a week for somebody, every week you pick up 5 kilos, you deliver them a chunk of change, you could deliver them a big bag of money for that. And one night, the heavens open up and God Almighty himself says, listen, the Holy Spirit's coming into your heart and you're born again and life's good and, you need to turn your back on this stuff. So you're doing your last drop and the guy says, your stuff's there. And you go, I don't want to take it. Skies opened up last night. God himself appeared to me. My heart's bloomed open and I ain't doing it any longer. What do you think the chances are of you getting out that car? Do you think that guy's going to let you go?
Not easily.
Not easily. And I think that there's an aspect in our mind is self-serving and has an investment in us staying small and not growing and not moving forward and not moving into the light. And anywhere that I'm ever stuck, I always take it back to evolution. If I get stuck and I can't answer a question or I just go evolution. The sun is a relatively new concept in the nature of our universe. We are, I believe there's a primordial memory somewhere at a cellular level locked within us that remembers the darkness much more than it does the light. The light's a new concept.
That's interesting.
In the nature of our existence, the nature of, however old the universe is, the sun's just in kindergarten in comparison. So it's like we need to really nourish that aspect of ourselves, which is then vulnerable. It's exposing us. We're more seen in the light. We're more seen when we shine. And those, shall we call demonic forces in others, because in order for them to meet us, they've got to actually step up to meet us in that place of light, or they're going to try and cut us down. So any time that we step out, we're putting ourselves at risk of being cut down. Does that make sense?
That makes perfect sense. That's some insightful shit, my friend. It reminds me of a Jordan Peterson quote where he talks about what's the therapy called? Where you get used to a fear.
Exposure.
He talks about exposure therapy. Where was it going with this? I'm losing it.
I'm witnessing you losing it.
You are.
I'm in the Two Tongue Podcast studio right now.
Watching it happen.
It's like this quantum computer's just...
I've got too many thoughts going on in my head because you talked about devil as a protecting mechanism, that the spirit that I'm referring to when I talk about the devil that's within us as something that's there for a reason, that there's there to protect us from something.
Yes.
Which I'm guessing has there's some, your not knowledge of trauma and working with trauma has there's some more there that needs to be said about that. And that's very interesting to me. But even more interesting is the idea that that dark part that I'm calling the devil might be somehow related to that deep historical memory you just referenced, that we were the darkness before we became a combination of darkness and light, because that's how I see us.
Well, let's tell a story. Yeah. And I'm possibly not going to get this accurately, so don't shoot the messenger, but I'll do the best that I possibly can with it. So if we look at ourselves as cells, trillions and trillions of cells that are inside our body, and let's just say for an example that if we look at the cell and we look at the mitochondria, the electrical potential, that's the oxygenating potential at the source of that cell, and that mitochondria contains its own special DNA, which is different from the rest of our DNA, right? So it's this special little mitochondria that's creating this electrical potential that's the source of life. And it's oxygenating. Now, through oxidative stress and some of the stuff that we were talking about earlier on around about cortisol and, it being a biomarker for inflammation, and that inflammation and at a cellular level, the cell starts to become calcified. Let's say that the skin then stops the bioavailability of oxygen to go between the cell and the bloodstream. Yeah. And then that oxygenating potential starts to drop. So it drops below a certain level, and then there's a primordial memory that's ignited within that microscopic cell that remembers when it was breathing methane. So what the cell starts to do is the cell starts to ferment. It starts a fermentation process. Now in the West, we call that cancer. So what the cell is attempting to do is it's attempting to survive, because that's what we're all pre-programmed for, sure. We're pre-programmed for survival. So within a microscopic cell that, you can't see with the human eye, you need to look at it underneath a microscope, somewhere within that, in the library of that cell, there's a primordial memory of when it breathed methane. It goes, oh, I remember this. Let's start fermenting. Now, it's trying to protect us, but it doesn't realize that that's actually going to have a detrimental effect to the organism, and we're going to call that cancer.
Wow.
So if that's possible at a cellular memory, as we step out into the quantum field, we step out into the world, then surely somewhere part of our primordial programming, if you want to call it that, is still more associated to the darkness than whatever is going to be to the light, if the light's a relatively new concept. And we need to be educated. You take a fish out of dirty water and you put it into clean water, it'll excel, it'll do great, it'll do absolutely fantastic. The minute we put it back into dirty water again, what's it going to do?
Get sick.
It's going to get sick.
Yeah.
It's no brainer. It's not rocket science.
Right.
It's just through effective connections where there's trust and there's respect, and we can allow each other to grow again, and only through that vulnerability. Because I've got a theory around about the full moon. Like, people turn around and say, like things go a bit wild in a full moon, and I'm like, well, that's a bit goo and gobbledygook for me, right? But on a basic level, if I was a organism out on the prairies on a full moon, I have to be much more alert than when there's no moon, because I'm going to get seen. Because when there's a big white planet in the sky lighting up the prairies, I've got to really be on guard. And that on guard could lead to like hypervigilance, paranoia, checking out in the shadows what's going on, right? Because I'm bait to the bigger predators at that point. So then the sun and walking in the light and shining and being who you can be immediately comes along with vulnerability. And who likes being vulnerable? Vulnerali, to wound, where, it's like we've encoded vulnerability as a wound. But in actual fact, it's our greatest strength. But in order to be vulnerable, like we're being right now, we need to have trust and be encouraged by each other to show up here today and talk about stuff that goes on inside our head, because it's going to be ridiculed and people are going to say, what are you meeting? He's not even Scottish. He's going to murder you. It's like, well, okay, I take it, but I'm going to take the risk, right? We're going to have fun. We're going to have laugh. And as we're laughing together, we're creating oxytocin, we're creating connection, we're healing. It's just amazing that this is available, for less money than a weekend on crack. Why would you not do it? Why would you not do this? What do you think?
I love it. No, I was trying to circle back to.
Oh, I love that word. Now I'm hearing it. I love it. Circling back. I hear it.
I was trying to circle back to the thing that I lost earlier. It popped in my head. It was something about voluntarily facing the phobia. Remember we were talking earlier about.
Yes.
I feel like you might need to lean into that mic a little bit more.
Okay. Yeah, I didn't want to yell into it. So thank you. The idea that if you take somebody who's petrified of spiders and you want to get them unafraid, you have to through that exposure therapy, get them as close as they can to a spider until they are done, and then bring them closer and let them tell you when they're done. So you're never pushing them, you're never forcing them. And Jordan Peterson said he's done this, in practice for decades, that if you force them, the phobias will not go away. It has to be voluntary. And then he ties that voluntary part to the story of Christ, saying that Christ had to voluntarily sacrifice his life. It wouldn't be the same if he didn't have a choice. He had to choose to voluntarily. Now, this was tied to the conversation we were having, but it's been several minutes. We've covered a bunch of other topics, so I'm struggling to reconnect that. But that's where I was getting at. What comes to mind immediately? So let's do an association game. What comes to mind when I tell you that? Because it might help me to get back there.
Where we were at. We were talking about two opposing forces. We were talking about the devil and the protection, yes, and the darkness, and somewhere in the darkness it's trying to protect us because that's new. That sunlight's new and we don't know what it's going to be like out there. So I'm going to hold you back from it. So there's it's like very quickly it protects, but the minute that it's got you in its clutches, it doesn't want to let you go. And who wants to give up power?
Mm. So that reminds me of the Oedipal complex.
Yeah.
The devouring mother.
Beautiful.
Oh,
love it.
There's that story. Do you remember that story I told? I can't remember where it was from. Maybe it was Aesop's Fables. It was a story about a mother. I don't know if it was a human or an animal. If it was Aesop, maybe it was an animal. A mother that had two children. One child she loves. The other child she what's the word I'm looking for? Neglects, and that's by design. The child that she loves, she bundles and holds close to her so much that she suffocates the child. And if it wasn't for the fact that she neglected the other one, the line wouldn't survive. If she would have cradled them both close and loved them so much, she loved them to death. Loved them to death. And there was something about love them to death that I was getting at, but I can't remember. It's just the idea that something good can become toxic, something good can become evil, And maybe
but that's you then. That's us then through our narrow lens of duality, where we talk about. We now I'm involving myself, but like subjectivity, and is objectivity actually a real thing? And dare we say it that God is bad?
This is a great topic.
God is bad. God is nasty. But it's like one of the things that I learned recently, or I learned on that hike. I think if somebody said to I went and hiked around Mont Blanc before I did the Tour de Mont Blanc, before I went up Mont Blanc. So I'm traveling. What gets me into a hypnagogic trance, what gets me into that altered state of consciousness is anything after 8 to 10 miles, my default mode network starts to drop and I start to fall into expansion. So I love walking for that reason. And, day after day after day, just doing 25, 30 miles every day. And I was in it. And I think my experience that I brought home with me was that if somebody said to me, "How was your hike? Was it difficult?" I can't truthfully answer you that, because was the hike difficult? Was the heat that I was walking in difficult? Was some of the nights that I was in dorms made it difficult? What would have made it difficult? Because if we could isolate the hike, it's easy. But sometimes the food wasn't great, so my energy wasn't as high. We can't isolate any experience if every experience is all happening all at once, simultaneously,
Right.
all around us. So good and bad are the same thing.
Hallelujah, man.
And good and bad are the same thing, in my opinion. It's only when we can start to drop through the lens of duality and see things through a more, such a shit word, but oneness lens, a lens of oneness,
Yeah.
that there isn't actually any separation. And there isn't any separation. I'm here right now. The only thing that separates us is distance and time. I've listened to you for a year. I've listened to hundreds of episodes that you've done. And as you're speaking, I'm shouting, I'm walking with headphones on going, yes, yes, that's it, to both of you.
Love it.
And it's like, maybe we don't allow ourselves to connect at that level, because in order to do that, it's vulnerable.
Yes.
And it's like, we've got to drop our default mode network. We've got to drop our ego, and we've got to reach out. That little voice didn't want me. Don't reach out on Twitter. They're going to think you're a dick.
What is that?
Don't do that. Don't do that. Don't do that. And here I am, and I sat round the table, and it was as if there was a slight nerves, but it's as if I've known you all my life. Or have I not known you all my life?
Yes.
There's something within me that's known you before I've met you.
Yes.
And I don't know what that something is, but I'm willing to explore it.
Makes the hair stand up on my arms, Ross. It really does. It makes the hair right now. You've heard me say that many times. Makes the hair stand up on my arms. There is something. There's something that within us that has known each other forever.
Absolutely.
I believe that.
Absolutely. And is that part of our crusade, the Christopher Columbus, and having to go out and having to own it? Does that make it limitless? Does that then make it go away? Like that voice you hear when you're when you realize you're meditating, you're no longer meditating. Trying to explore what that something is going to actually make it dissipate. So I don't want to explore what it is. I don't want to know what it is. I'm just opening my heart that it's there. There's a remembering. I see you, and I see you, and that's enough for me.
Dude, that's so well put. The moment you realize, the moment you remember you're meditating, you're not meditating. And you described your long hikes, and I imagine when you said you get deep enough into the hike that your default mode network starts to fail, that you're talking about that feeling of being in the zone, feeling where time doesn't matter anymore, and it's just experience. And there are things that can be known. I don't think that there's a difference between the word known and experiencing. I think that knowledge and experience are the same. We can get into the weeds on that, but I think that's the case. There are things that can be known strictly through experience. And the moment you intellectualize them, it's unknowable.
Absolutely.
You have to be it.
Yes.
And I've tried to explain that in 1,000 ways on the podcast. When I say that I experienced being God, like I know that God exists because I am God. And that just doesn't go over well. Nobody understands that. And you just articulated it in a fantastic way. It's a knowledge through experience that is only available through experience.
Absolutely. Because it only gets switched on through experience. And then trying to bring it back into a 2 or 3 dimensional form, you lose it. So learning to live in the counterintuitive, learning to inhabit the paradox. And one of the ways of living in the paradox is not trying to explain the paradox, because the minute you try to explain it, you lose it.
The Tao that can be spoken of is not the
Absolutely.
Love it.
True. And learning to just come here and share the gratitude of what you've given me. If I were to put, so if we try and equate things into a financial figure, you know, what could I put into a financial figure what listening to, let's just say, 250 hours of your time into a financial figure? Well, I can't really. But if you say, well, okay, but you've got to pay for the therapeutic intervention that Kyle and Chris have given you over the last year. You've got to, Ross, right? We're forcing you to write a check. What would it be? I can absolutely guarantee you that it would be much more than what it cost me to fly up here from Florida. Yeah, and get a room for a night, and you know, whatever.
Bring it in, man. I just want to touch you. Thank
You know?
Thank you.
And it's like we get so caught up in the humdrum of we have no idea, because we became so not singularity, but became so selfish, so omnipotent, or we're in our work and we're just going through our work. And I know that Kyle's been going through a hard time and that Kyle's not been here. As a brother, do I want Kyle to be going through that hard time? Absolutely not. But it's not my job to take his pain away. That's not my job. He needs to be in it for as long as he needs to be in it. That's his job. And I never came here with the intention to take that pain away. That's not my position. But if by coming here, he gets to hear that he's changed my life for the better, and somewhere that brings him back out to be able to give to his environment, give to people, then it's a really small price to pay, in my opinion. And if we all did more of that, what do you think that electromagnetic field that we inhabit would look like?
Different.
It would look different.
I'm inspired, man. I'm inspired to go out of my way, above and beyond what I ordinarily would do, to share gratitude.
Absolutely.
It's so important.
Absolutely.
There's almost nothing better.
There is nothing better. There is absolutely nothing better.
I wonder if that appreciation, if that is what religious people mean by worship.
Absolutely. And it's such a fridge magnet. And there's knowing and there's knowing. And it's like, oh, I'm so grateful, or it's a fridge magnet and I'm just grateful for where I'm at right now. But it's almost like it's being delivered through this psycho-spiritual circus that we're inhabiting, that it's not actually being delivered because it's being said through an egonic perspective. It's not something what you say, it's what you do. It's really hard to describe what I see. It's the words just keep coming into my head. How many times should I forgive my Lord? Well, 7 times 70 times 70. That doesn't mean a mathematical equation in my mind. It just means all the fucking time.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Live it. Don't think it. Live it. Just be gratitude. Just be love.
I love it, man.
It's like, oh, I'm jumping about. I'm so excited to be here. And it's all coming out all gobbledygook. But it's like, if we are an electrochemical organism that lives in a biochemical bodysuit that inhabits an electromagnetic field, right? Let's just think that's what we are, okay? Just humor me for a minute. So if we can measure the electrical amplitude of our brain from, let's just say for an argument, 2 centimeters off the top of our head, and we're communicating with that electromagnetic field from our mind, okay, that's cool. That's good. But if we can measure the electrical activity of the heart from 6 feet off of the body, what do you think would happen to that electromagnetic field if we started to communicate it from our hearts, where gratitude lives, where acceptance lives, where forgiveness lives? Because why are you so concerned with a speck of dust in your brother's eye and you're not prepared to take the plank of wood out of your own? Jesus said that 2,000 years ago, and Freud spent his whole life putting that into a psychological thesis. And it's like, if I judge you, I'm judging myself, and I'm going to take myself out of the prison, and I'm going to use you as my teacher, because anything in you that I judge is showing a place that's either hidden or unseen in myself. And I want to grow, so I'm going to stop pointing my finger, because there's 3 fingers pointing back at me. And I'm going to actually use my environment as my teacher rather than my nemesis, because I no longer want to be stuck. There are far more summers behind me than there are in front of me, and I want to enjoy the rest of my life, and I want to live in this place, and I want to put the hard work in, because for me, it is far more freeing living in this place than it is in the purgatory that I lived in for the first 45 years of my life.
It's incredible to the of your life being like living subdued, and only now do you feel like you're, I don't know what word to put it, authentic and free to, I don't know what word to use. The only thing I can compare that to is when I had my own mystical experience that I've talked about ad nauseum, an experience that feels like it changed the course of my life, that I'm not the same person. Like, it's not entirely true. And I've said this many times. There are all kinds of experience, maybe every experience makes you a different person than you were. Every moment that ticks by, you're a different person. And there's all sorts of ways we can conceptualize that. I understand that to be the case. But then there is experiences like the mystical experience that I've described that was it was an earthquake. It was a catastrophic worldview change for me. And it made the world brighter. For me, it made, I've said this before, you probably remember me saying this. I have these moments where I look around, like a lot of times when I'm driving, I look at the trees, I look at the houses, I look at the lake, the sunrise, the glare, the snow, the rain, those sorts of things, the people. And I have these moments where I feel the way I felt when I was in the mystical experience. And I see them, everything I see, as God. And it's like there's still something that is between me and the realization of that experience, but I feel like it's just behind the surface. If I could just scratch it, everything that I experience and encounter is God. And I didn't have that before. And now I have this sort of magical way of viewing the world and my behavior and everyone else's behavior. And it makes the rest of my life unique. It was like BC AD divide. There was before I had the mystical experience and after I had the mystical experience. And you're suggesting that there was 45 years of your life before that switch got flipped, and now you're living in a different place, in a different body, in a different mind. Talk about that. I know we talked a little bit about that yesterday, but the audience has no idea what you mean.
I would say that for the first 45 years of my life, I was shame-based. I was living in shame. And shame is the fuel of the ego. It needs it to drive me and stay in duality. But when I see myself as part of it all, then I can live in awe and wonder and appreciation and become an alchemist of my own biochemical factory and start to tune this machine to whatever way I want it to be. And I want it to live in expansion and not contraction any longer. Because contraction's fine for a little while, but I don't want to hang out there long. The spring's got to get tight to pull me up into the thermos and allow me to fly. And I'm willing to put whatever work that takes in. People are lazy. You know, people are fundamentally lazy and people don't want to change. They want to read a self-help book and they want to see the moment. They don't want to put in the work. It's fucking hard work.
Do the hard thing.
Do the fucking hard thing, man. Get
That's
up
right.
off your fucking arse and do it. You know, face into it and choose your hard. You know, choose your hard. It's hard being poor. It's really, really hard being poor. But it's also really hard budgeting, and it's really hard squirreling some money away and not buying shit you don't need to impress people you don't fucking know. Just stop it. Stop the shit, you know? And I'm willing to put in the work now because I've experienced what it's like to live in expansion and joy and have love fill my heart and, you know, give up the bitterness and the resentment and the anger. That anger done much more damage to the vessel that it was contained in than anybody I could ever spill it on. It's just not worth it for me.
So this just popped into my head and I want to share it with you. When I was, I told you when we were kids, we worked at a movie theater. It's this old movie theater that had been around forever. I had this weird experience one time. I was working at the theater. This woman comes in with her kids, middle-aged woman with her kids, and I had an interaction with them at the concession stand. And I walked by them. They were, after the movie, they were sitting, the woman was sitting on a bench by the bathrooms. The kids were in the bathroom. And she pulled me aside and she said something to me. I can't remember exactly what it was, but she asked me like if I was a Christian or something weird that I wasn't expecting from a stranger. And she said that it was, the reason she asked me was because there was some air, some spirit, something that was pouring off of me in the interaction with these kids that for her was refreshing. And it was like a recognition of kindness and enthusiasm and sincerity and something about the way I was interacting with them. And she thought that I must be filled with the Holy Spirit, as Christians like to say. I must be somebody who's religious because otherwise I wouldn't have had that interaction the way that I did with her kids. And I don't exactly know what that means. I kind of do. But when you were having that conversation with my aunt earlier, you met her, the way that you were so kind with her, and you know, just the banter and the love. I felt that way. I felt that way. I was looking at you, and I felt like there's something more to Ross. There's some enlarged spirit, some potent spirit that you could tell, you could see it, and it's not something you see every day. It's not something you see in everyone. So it just popped in my head, so I'm just sharing that with you, man.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate you saying that. I do. I feel your honesty and your openness. But that something's available to us all. And it's learning to master your own biochemical factory. It's learning to go for chemicals which promote expansion versus contraction. You could use your analogy of the devil again. You could use that. You know, like if there is a devil, does the devil believe in oneness, unity, love, joy, expansion, and creativity? Or does the devil believe in isolation, loneliness, fear? And those components, when you're in any of them, the delivery system is dripping chemicals.
Do you think there's a consciousness to the devil? You know, like you said, does the devil believe in oneness, or does he believe in, you know, the isolation? Like, I think that the devil does believe in oneness and he fights against it. You know
Yes.
what I mean? It's like it's not that the devil believes that we're all isolated. It's that the devil knows that we are all, that the oneness is there, and he's trying to get us to turn away from that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah,
That's how I see it too.
Yeah, I would align with that. That makes perfect sense to me, yes. And it's got an investment. You know, there's always a secondary gain to all of the way that we're behaving. For me, I think that I had to wake up to the fact that I had a compulsion to perhaps acting a certain way because it allowed me to be manipulative, and I was taking from my environment instead of giving to my environment.
I identify with that.
You know, and
Yeah.
that takes a lot of honesty. But when you get to the other side of the fence and you get to feel what it's like living in this body, I think I need to give a bit of context around it, because we've kind of just jumped right into this because we're all super excited. And those of you listening, it's like, I've came from Scotland, I've met Kyle and Chris, and we're just super excited. And it's like, well, hi everybody, I'm Ross, and I'm from Scotland. I'm 51 this year. I'll be 51 in November 2023. And
Your birthday's coming up.
yeah, this is
All
my
right.
birthday present to myself, coming
Nice, man.
to meet you guys. And since 2008, I've been working as a counsellor, psychotherapist, and I work with an integrative model. I studied personal construct psychology, the work of George Kelly. I work basically from a psychoanalytic, psychodynamic perspective, where I see that the past is always present, but the present need not be our past. I've studied and have a qualification in cognitive behavioural therapy. Why? Because it gets you jobs. Okay, it's quick. I don't necessarily agree with it. Person-centered, I think, is a nice model that I've studied as well. That's my job. That's what I do now. And what got me into this was that I went to a party when I was 14, a drugs and alcohol fueled party from the age of 14, and went on a 7-year bender, went on a 7-year flyer until I collapsed one day in my local town and couldn't go, and my body shut down on me. So I sought guidance from a therapist, I saw guidance from a counsellor, and I started to explore and perhaps unpick the tapestry of my own patchwork quilt. And what I'm sure there was many experiences prior to this, but I'm going to set the scene. I'm a 14-year-old boy, and I'm walking down from school home, and I come into the house, and my mum's in the kitchen with my 2 aunts. And my mum said, "I've got something to tell you." Now, even a dumb 14-year-old knows that telling means I've got something to tell you, right? And she stood up from her chair and she walked through to her bedroom, and she opened my father's wardrobe doors aggressively and walked out. And I'm left there standing in the middle of this big bedroom looking at these empty wardrobes, and I'm thinking, well, what's happened? There's no clothes in it. I'm going to make a guess that Dad's left. And I noticed that as I started to get more honest with myself and more honest with my feelings and getting more emotionally intelligent about myself, that there was a moment in that experience where I noticed that my lips started to quiver and I felt a tightening in my throat. The Ross that walked out of that bedroom was a very different Ross from what walked into it. And I walked out that bedroom with bravado and a swagger, and now I'm allowed to swear because something bad's happened. And I say, I take it that fucking prick's left. And it was as if it was scripted. The phone went the minute I walked into the kitchen where my mum and my aunts were. And my mum went, "It's for you." So in that moment, very, very quickly, I had to make a decision about who I'm aligning with, right? Because I need a home. I need to be protected. I need to be looked after. I need to be fed, right? So was it true how I felt with what I said, which was, before I even heard who it was, I said, "See, you prick, you can take yourself to fuck. I don't want anything to do with you," right? And hung up the phone. I then said to my mum, "Can I go out and play?" And I jumped on my little BMX and I went away down to the local park, and there were 2 punks sitting in the park, and they were smoking like a meter-long cigarette, a big long cigarette. And there was like a bag of cans full of alcohol. And I said, "Here, give me one of those cans." And they reached into the bag and they gave me it. And that was it. I went from 0 to 60 faster than an electric Tesla. I was instantly bang. That was my Tylenol for my headache. And that went on for 7 years. And as I started to unpick that experience, one of the many experiences of where I abandoned myself, right? Sure, my father had abandoned the family. That's true. But my mother also abandoned me in that room where she didn't have the emotional capacity to be able to hold me in the experience of loss. She left me to deal with that myself as a 14-year-old guy. So very, very quickly, there was something happened in a nanosecond to protect me, was where I abandoned myself and became an adaptation, became a caricature, became an actor. So in my journey of recovering from drugs and alcohol, which began in April the 27th, 1993, I've not been creating anything new. I've been uncovering all the aspects of myself that I abandoned in order to navigate this painful planet. So those adaptations, they worked momentarily, but those adaptations could only be validated by external validation. There was no internal validation. And I learned very quickly that I couldn't feel anything like a compliment, or you'd buy a Range Rover or a Rolex or a $500 pair of shoes, and they felt good for about 25 seconds. And there was no foundation, because it was the adaptation wasn't built in any sense of authenticity or authority. And the feelings would just go through it like sand. So those aspects of myself were all shame-based aspects. They were full of shame. And I believe that shame is what destroys consciousness and destroys growth. So as I interpret the early creation story from a biblical perspective, and we look at the psychology that I've learned, the fundamental foundation of all psychology is pretty much thoughts, feelings, actions. What you think is electrical, what you feel is chemical. Those chemicals, that Molotov cocktail of feeling, because we're not electrochemical. You can't say it fast enough. We're actually, electrochemical is the same thing. It happens at the same time. There's no delay. There's no turbo lag. There's no boost lag. It's thought, feeling. It's instant, and then action. So if we look at that Christian story where the supposed Eve, they were not allowed to eat from the tree, and they went down and ate the fruit from the fruit from the forbidden tree, where the snake tempted Eve and, do you want to eat some of this? And Eve said, no, I'm not allowed. Who told you not to eat it? Well, God told me not to eat it. Why did God say you've not to eat it? Because I'll die. And the serpent laughed and said, you'll not die. You will know the difference between evil. So she thought the idea and she ate it, and she shared them. And if we look at that early creation story, the very first thing that they did, so let's work backwards from psychology, thoughts, feelings, actions. The action that they took was that they covered their nakedness. You could explore what nakedness really means: vulnerability, creativity, whatever expression, self-expression, seeing the self as a self, whatever that looks like. But the feeling that's documented in a millennium-old text is shame. So shame works on the same neuroreceptor sites in the brain as illegal drugs and illegal drugs. Shame is also the fuel that the ego requires in order to keep the furnace of the default mode network running, right? So shame is what took us from the fall into duality, and the ego sees us as separate. So the only way that we can start to free ourselves, forgive ourselves, and that we are already forgiven, is to let go of shame and see ourselves as innocent, because we've actually not left the garden. The garden hasn't went anywhere. It's still in exactly the same place it's always been. So does that make any sense?
So it's touching a nerve for me.
Okay.
Like I'm feeling myself get caught up in this. So this, first of all, I want to say it's a terrible experience that you shared. I'm sorry that you had that experience. We did an episode called Shame, Shame, Shame. Do you remember that?
Yep.
I was trying desperately to say what you just said, something like what you just said. I feel like shame is the enemy that I'm dealing with right now. It's the challenge for me at this moment. I feel it more and more all the time. And I was struggling to tell Kyle what I meant by that, partly because what comes to my mind when I say, when the example that immediately comes to my mind, I'm literally too ashamed to say it. So I didn't tell you. I'm not going to say it here, but another example did come to me. I was at a wedding, and everybody was dancing, and I'm not a good dancer. My children were at the wedding, and they wanted to dance, and I sat there like a stick in the mud. Didn't want to go out and dance. I did for the sake of my girls, because I wanted them to have the experience. They were in a joyful moment, and I was keeping them from experiencing that. That's selfish, terribly selfish. So I got over my shame, and I went out there, and I was a goofball in front of people that I'll never see again. And why would the fear of embarrassing myself in front of strangers keep me from doing that for my kids. So I got over it. I danced. That's another example. Is what possible outcome could there be to get up and dance in public? You're going to have fun. You know, even if you are goofy, people are going to think it's funny, and you can laugh with them and you can enjoy it. It doesn't have to be a situation that prevents me from living, but I do think that shame prevents me from living. I think it prevents me from something that I can't quite put my finger on. There's something to be gained by conquering it. And I don't know what it is. Maybe I do know what it is, but it's not conscious to me what that is. So everything you're saying about shame and about it being the enemy of consciousness is just, it's ringing of truth. And I don't know what it is that I need, but something that you're saying is resonating with me. So I'm just telling you.
So I remember that episode, and I see clearly what you mean now. I do see how shame would do that, but I don't know if you remember that episode that well, but I was pushing back on Chris, and I like when you do something that you know is wrong. Do you not think that is shame that is telling you that? What is?
I would say that is guilt.
Guilt? Okay.
Guilt is that you've done something wrong. Shame is that you are wrong.
Okay. I can see that delineation.
So personally, I don't see any value in shame other than to keep us out the garden. Whereas guilt is actually, if used effectively, is a good tool for morality.
Okay.
Okay, that was maybe a bit kind. A good tool for morality, but it's a good gauger.
Yeah.
It's a good gauge. But even in this moment, okay, so in this moment, what I noticed, and I had to really work on it to come back to connection, was Chris said, we'd need to listen it back. But what I heard was, I'm triggered by what you just said. So my brain took me into, fuck, he doesn't agree with me. So then because of that, I actually then couldn't hear what he was saying.
Interesting.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like I noticed that my brain put up the wall, but I desperately wanted to hear what he was saying. And I had interpreted it completely wrong. Right? So I wasn't all in on what he was saying. I was more than 50% in, but there was a part of me not, because what I thought he said, what I heard through my lens was, I don't agree with you.
And it was the opposite.
Yeah.
The opposite. Yeah.
But only through allowing myself to hear you could I get drawn back into connection, because that aspect of me wanted to interpret what you said as I don't agree with you to get me out the room. And I went, I'm not going out the room. Thank you for trying to pull me out the room. Yeah, but there was a very small part of me left. And then I listened, and then I went, and then I'm back into the room again with you.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, how often do we do that?
All the time.
All the time.
All the time.
Stupid fucks.
That's that being present in the moment stuff. It's all cliche self-help stuff, but it's so true. It's so true, you know? We're conscious beings. Why don't we be conscious?
Yes.
Why don't we be aware and present?
Yeah.
You know?
But, Jesus said that the devil is the prince of the earth. And, this is the devil's planet. And consciousness is not meant to repeat itself. Yeah. Consciousness is meant to expand. It's fractal. It's meant to keep going. Yeah. It's meant to keep just like lava coming down the side of a volcano. It's meant to just keep pouring. But I got this so clear. You won't know it, but there's a show in the UK called EastEnders, East End of London, EastEnders, right? It's been on a Tuesday and a Thursday for as long as I can remember. I actually nearly went to Google it, right, and see when it started. So I've really been thinking about this Jesus said that the devil is the prince of the earth, and how the devil has got a major investment in us just repeating patterns and thinking that we're getting out of the maze, but we're not. We're just going round the maze. We're just going round and round the maze. And I'd finished a busy day at work, and I jumped on, and I don't watch normal TV. I just go to Netflix or Amazon Prime or Apple TV. But in order to get one of those apps open, I've got the normal TVs there behind it. And it was EastEnders, right? And I'm looking at it, and it's the same actors, and they've all aged, and they don't look good. And I'm looking at it, and I'm like, whoa, that's been on since I was about 10. That's 40 years of Tuesday and Thursday. How many people my age have watched that all their life, and their kids and grandkids are coming in to visit them, and that's blaring in the corner of the living room? And every Tuesday and every Thursday at 7 p.m, they turn on the telly and anchor themselves into that old familiar pattern. Yeah. That's got the devil rubbing his hands together and going, I've got them, just repeating the same pattern over and over for their whole life on this planet, scrolling through shit on TikTok, scrolling through same pattern.
Yes.
Instead of actually allowing yourself to surrender to the ocean of continuation and just be held in the river and flow and grow.
It's amazing. There's this book, we've been talking about this book, Paralandra.
C.S. Lewis?
Yes. There's a scene in this book where the main character goes from Earth to Venus, and he finds himself confronted with an alien being who lives on Venus. And the experience of Venus, by the way, is an ocean world. And he's, at first, when he gets there, he's just floating in this all these crazy waves. It's dangerous and terrifying. Then he finds himself like a floating island of vegetation, and that's how the continents are. They're described like these big floating islands, but they're like undulating with the waves, so the land is always moving. And on one of these islands that comes close to him, he sees another being there. It's a woman, and he goes out, and the whole imagery is of Adam and Eve. He gets there. He's naked when he arrives. He's on this virgin planet, and there's all these. When he finds this woman, there's this only woman there. All the animals there are like her servants. They're all like tending to her, and they're all around her all the time. And you get this Adam and Eve sort of motif in the story. And where the fuck was I going with this? Jesus Christ! She was describing how God, who she calls Meleldil, God sends experiences at you in waves, like the waves that she exists on. She's accustomed to getting whatever's coming. And why? And she's talking about, like, why should you not be excited? Why should you not be grateful of whatever wave comes your way? Because Absolutely. It's all a gift from God.
Absolutely.
And that's how she's describing it.
Absolutely.
And he tells her, he says, when you saw me, you thought I was the king. The king is like her Adam, and she's lost him on the island somewhere because it's a big floating world. She's lost him. And when she sees Ransom, the main character, she thinks that's her Adam. That's the king. And she's disappointed when she sees him, that it's not the king. And he tries to explain to her that when you saw me, when you saw Ransom, you thought I was somebody else. And for a moment, you were disappointed. And then it dawned on her that she had wanted something. And what she received wasn't what she wanted. And for the first moment, she realized, and she says this in this beautiful way, she says, I should just try to find it. She says, in fact, let me find it. I have it written down. This is amazing. She says, sorry, bear with me.
What does she say?
Well, fuck it. She says something like she felt like suddenly she was, man, how do I say this? Suddenly she was responsible for how she felt about what was coming at her. Up until that moment when she realized, when he pointed out that she had her own opinion about what was happening, she just rode the wave. Whatever came to her was good. And that was experience. And that was all good. It was, it was like this innocent perspective. And then when she realized that she was in fact disappointed, that she wanted something else than what she received, that suddenly she had the experience of being an I, of having her own experience, of her own opinion. And what God was sending her all of a sudden was, she said she was no longer floating on the wave, but she was swimming in it. That's how she described it. Before, she was just part of the experience of the wave. And now she has an opinion about the wave. And it was this interesting, different version of the becoming conscious story. Oh, yeah. Yeah.
I've heard it on the podcast 100 times.
Ross, you go upstairs and pee, and we'll talk amongst ourselves. Yeah. So, yeah, just an interesting twist on this story from the Garden of Eden about the birth of consciousness. And her description was noticing the difference between being a part of the wave and then suddenly finding herself riding it out of her control.
Mm-hmm.
You know, like she's suddenly a separate from the experience. You know,
Yeah,
it's beautiful. I don't know if you remember that.
I do. Yeah, man.
So now that Ross has stepped away, let's talk about him. This has been good. I do feel like I'm dominating the conversation too much. So
I've been concentrating on, because we're not all on camera easily, so I've been just kind of,
I noticed that.
Yeah,
you've been doing the Jamie business.
Kind of, yeah. I did. One of the cameras just popped out of existence there. Did you see that? I had to like put it back on the screen.
No, that's weird.
I hope it didn't fuck anything up.
Probably not.
Yeah, I mean, either way, we still got Hindenburg running.
I guess we'll find out. Yeah,
we shall see.
That shame topic, like there's a couple things he said that struck a chord with me. It happened once when I was talking to Josh Hamilton, one of those episodes I did with him, where he was talking about something about like the role of a father in like communicating to his kids that they're doing what they should be doing, I guess that he's part of it, that they know that what they're doing is good, and that a father's role is to show them what you're doing is good or bad. And there was something he said about that like struck me, man. It like almost brought tears to my eyes. And anyway, I just had a couple of moments like that during this conversation. It's really interesting how
you almost started crying.
Yeah, it's just like your emotions tell you something if you're not quite grounded. And that's what I was having, is whatever it is I'm feeling, because it's not a thought yet. I'm feeling something and I'm trying to explain it like in real time. You know?
Yeah.
How'd everything come out, Ross? Good?
Oh, I couldn't. I'm just so stoked to be here. I went up there for a pee. It's surreal, isn't it? It's amazing. When you were talking about the C.S. Lewis thing, and my head went into that association that we make. You know, the what I was thinking about was, when I was up the stairs having a pee, was, you know, the tree gives out oxygen, yeah, and we take that in, and then we give out carbon, and the tree takes that in, yeah, and never once in that exchange does the oxygen say it's more important than the carbon. And it's like that bottleneck, you know, that nobody taught us how to be with the bottleneck, and nobody actually taught us how to be with the expansion. It's like you were talking about things come at us in waves, and that's what it's like. It's like we go through periods in our life where it's expansive and lucrative, and periods where it's tight and can be challenging and difficult. And it's meant to be like that. But the minute that we feel ourselves starting to spiral, if you want, or slide towards the bottleneck, it's almost like we start fighting it. Yes. And the resistance of suffering creates more suffering. Yeah.
Yes.
And our mind's making an association to the past time when it was difficult, and it's never going to be the same, because you can't stand in the same river twice. But then you go into the tight one and you make an association to it, and you're hooked. Now, you're meant to go into a difficult time. You're meant to, but you're maybe only meant to be there for moments or hours. We end up in it for months and years. That's not what's intended for us, because things have got to get tight in order for them to expand out again. And likewise, when we're in the expansion, we get an association to them and we don't want it to end. We don't want the good times to end. So then we're hooked either into the good times and we get hooked into the bad times. And we're like a ping pong in a ping pong machine, just getting battered about instead of just surrendering. Just keep surrendering. And the more that you surrender, the more you get to experience it all as it is.
What comes to my mind when you say that, surrendering, because I agree with you. That's the abandonment of self. It's the ego death sort of situation. Abandoning. Hold on, I lost it again. I do that, man. I try to get poetic. I start rambling, and then I lose it. Kyle laughs because he fucking knows
all the time.
Say it again.
Learning to live in the counter, when we learning to live in that counterintuitive, learning to live in the paradox, things are meant to get tight, things are meant to get hard, so that like a kite flying in the thermos, it can't stay up there all the time. You've got to bring it down to let it catch the thermos to pull it back up again. The things are dying and being reborn and opening up, and we've not been taught effectively.
I remember what it was. In Islam in particular, they have this idea. Islam means submission, right? It's the idea that you have to submit yourself to God. You have to defer your will to God's will.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And I think not that that's exclusive to Islam. That's a relatively common idea, but I think that's related as a religious idea. The idea of submission to God is something like what you were describing.
Yeah, and submission and domination are the same thing. But when you use the word dominate, you immediately get a dark image, perhaps, of a woman with black leather and a whip. Maybe dominating. But to fully dominate your experience, it's the same side of the same coin.
Yes.
Submission
Yes.
is domination.
Yes. Yes.
You can only dominate your environment. You can only control your mind when you can submit to it.
Yes.
So it's like the difference of, we walk through our life thinking we're God. We've not really learned that we are God. It's only through living in the paradox that, by letting go of trying to control and being controlled, then we can actually live in creation. Because, creation and destruction is the same thing. But most of us are destroying our lives and destroying our planet instead of creating and being the masters. But instead of being a passive passenger, actually being a conscious creator and living in co-creation and interdependency. Instead, what we do is we somehow swing between being independent and dependent in relationships, instead of our own acceptance around about our own right to be conscious creators of our own reality and learning to live in interdependency. I think the difficult thing about that for people's psyche is that in order to get to interdependency, you've got to be okay and enter it through being okay with dependency, which throws up all of our childhood traumas, if you like. You'll never enter interdependency through the paradigm of independence. You can only enter into interdependency and co-creation through dependency and vulnerability, because vulnerability is our ultimate strength and creativity. No?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've got this idea of it's an Orthodox doctrine. It's about emptying yourself. What's it called? Hesychasm? No. What's
I don't know off the top of my
head.
head.
There's an idea that that when you empty yourself of yourself, you won't be empty. You'll be filled. It's like you're in the way of being filled with your true spirit, which is God.
Yeah.
And if you empty yourself of yourself, you won't find yourself empty. You'll find yourself filled with God. And that's an idea that I I don't know. I don't understand it entirely, but it's
beautiful.
intriguing to me.
That's
Yes.
beautiful. It is. It's almost like scarcity consciousness.
Mm.
We're holding on to a purse full of pennies, not willing to open them up to be filled full of $50 notes.
Right. Right.
You know, it's like that vacuum that's full of pennies, yeah, not willing to open up and release it and let it go is stopping us from it being filled up with the worth that it could fill. It's like that scarcity consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
Not wanting to let go of our illusion of control.
And that's all it is. And that's all it is. There's something that Jordan Peterson said, that he said something to me, that's not to me. This is me falling into that same trap you were in earlier. Jordan Peterson said something once. He said something along the lines of, you can't escape tragedy. It's coming for you. You know? So you have to learn how to do that. And I think until I heard him say that I didn't exactly believe that. Like, I was trying to convince myself that wasn't true. But with enough time, every one of us is going to have the death of our parent, the death of our, somebody we love. Somebody's going to be sick and suffering. Somebody's going to become poor. They're going to have trauma. It's inevitable. You can't avoid it, and we pretend, we live our lives pretending like we can, and so we don't prepare. And that's kind of the entire point. It's the self-creation you were talking about. How we bounce back from those tragedies, how we rebuild ourselves. That is a self-creation that we're constantly in the process of doing. We're going to continue to hit those obstacles that are going to cause us to have to repair ourselves. The same as when we lift weights and our muscles have to repair themselves. We're building up something. And we are the ones. I love that phrase you used earlier about being an alchemist with yourself. What was that word, that phrase you used? It was
an alchemist of our own biochemical factory.
Yes, God damn it, that's awesome. The alchemist of our own biochemical factory. That we are self-created. We participate in the act of creation that started with God or our parents or both. And we continue to have the power to craft and form ourselves what we're going to be in the future. I got a little off track there, but God damn, that's amazing.
Isn't it just? Isn't it? And, having the desire to change your paradigm and do something different. And it's, you said, like Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan. And I'm just curious, have you emailed Joe and said you'd like to come meet him?
Never, no.
Have you emailed Jordan?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I emailed. I can pull it up for you. It was about 2019, I think. I sent Jordan an email to his University of, where was he at? Up in Canada. Toronto. I sent an email to his U Toronto address, it was like a page long. I was trying to keep it brief, but I was struggling. But then shortly after that, he lost his job there. So I don't think he will ever see it. Yeah.
Okay. So one email.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you think that's enough? Is that enough reps to make something? Is that enough to bring the forumless into forum?
I think what I wanted when I sent that message was to express gratitude. Okay. So it was enough. Was it enough for me to get it off of my heart?
Yes.
Kind of. But was it effective? Did it land? No, probably not. Does that mean there's more to be done? Do I have some obligation? I don't know. What do you think?
I don't know. My intention for you is to be on Jordan Peterson's podcast, if that's what you want to do.
I'd love to have a chat with him.
just step out and make it happen. I think that we limit ourselves so much.
Yes.
And, God will move mountains for us, but we need to walk towards them with a shovel.
So funny. I was re-listening to my episode on Aesop's Fables, and that was one of the fables. It was a paragraph story about a ship that goes down, and all the Greeks are sinking and they're dying. And one of the men is crying louder than all the others, and he's just floating there, screaming and treading water. And one of the soldiers beside him says, you can ask Athena to save you. Ask her, because that's what he was screaming. Save me, Athena, save me. I'm dying. He said, ask Athena to save you all you want, but move your arms. Move your fucking arms,
Yeah. Yeah. And the possibilities yet. I don't know, we're living in a culture which is so self-serving and so all about self right now, that it's rather than it's what can we take rather than what can we give.
Yes.
And how can I give myself more to my environment, and rather than trying to take validation from it. But there again, the system requires us to be disconnected from self, because if plastic surgery is $1 billion industry. The illegal drugs market is $1 billion industry. The alcohol taxation market is $1 billion industry. Now, if we were all connected, the opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is connection. And if we were connected to our hearts and our self and a more effective biochemical response to our environment, then would we need plastic surgery? Would we need drugs? Would we need alcohol?
Probably not.
No. So there's an investment, and that's me talking about something that I know nothing about, which is politics. There's a political investment in society being disconnected, because then it gets to keep the corporate wheel going. Yet if we were all connected and we were all free in ourselves and happy with what we have, rather than chasing an invisible God and worshipping the God of greed, gluttony, money, etc., then, yeah.
Yeah.
Huh?
Kyle, you've been quiet, man. You got any questions to ask Ross?
Yeah, so earlier in this podcast, you said that you had, dabbled with Jordan Peterson and you found him a bit right wing. And you just said that you don't involve yourself in politics too much. I know that in America and in a lot of Europe, I almost get the impression that our left wing is like the right wing over there,
Okay.
You know what I mean?
So, yes, I would say right wing's probably quite. There again, we were speaking about that. Very right is very, because I think our conservative and your liberal or socialist are different.
I'm more in terms of American politics, anyways. I would be considered right wing, and I don't know. I do think that I become more right wing. I've become more right wing as I've gotten older. But in terms of European politics, I would be very far right wing. So I just wonder, how do when I get to talking about cultural and political things, especially because one way that I try to be on the podcast is I try not to hold back. I try to say what I think and not really worry if it hurts people's feelings. Because I just think there's too much of that going on, you be honest, say how you feel, and let the chips fall as they may, So I do wonder, if you got the impression that Jordan Peterson is right wing, I would consider myself more right wing than Jordan Peterson. So I just wonder, how I come off to you in the podcast.
Not fundamentalist at all.
Yeah,
I don't see it as.
Yeah, I would not. That is definitely not a word that I would use to describe myself as fundamentalist, especially in terms of religion.
No.
That's the big thing that pulled me toward orthodoxy is there is a more philosophical way of thinking about these things than that fundamentalist. The earth is 6,000 years old. That type of a thing, taking everything completely literally. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
If you're using that word religious, although Chris seems to talk more about God, yet I've probably learned I'm more intrigued about your religious stance than Chris's, although Chris is the one that bangs on about it more.
Yeah.
So it's like your journey is has interested me.
Yeah.
You know, how you spoke about, because through the year of me listening to you, you've went from, oh no, well, that's not true, because I've only listened to episode 1 on the way up here, which was where you were an anarchist.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But so I never knew that, because I came in at S1E29.
Yeah.
Right.
I was still kind of in my like ANCAP phase back, anarcho-capitalist kind of phase back then. And I mean, honestly, I still do value things from that tradition, that you know, those philosophical ideas. There are some of them that I still, and you know, parts of all of it that I still value. But I don't know. I've definitely changed a lot, and it's interesting that there's like this like record of my change. You know, like a partial audio, partial video record of my my transformation.
And the Orthodox Christianity stuff, it made me go and look at it.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's fascinating. And I think for me, when I listen to you, is it important what you're studying, or is it important that you're studying it? And I think for me, it's more important that you're studying it rather than what you're studying.
Sure.
Because I think us having a commitment to one thing is really, really important, rather than it being scattered in I think it's much more beneficial for me to follow one belief system and do that very well, because that allows me to experience God rather than having to know a plethora of things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm not saying that anything within that plethora is wrong.
Sure.
I'm just saying that you can cut yourself too thin. So
yeah.
I like the fact that when you go into something, you go into the ritualistic aspects of it, because that's where the value comes from.
Mm-hmm.
That's how I see you as you talk.
Absolutely. I see that. I also think that my interest, I feel like Chris's interest in God and things like that, I don't want to say that it strictly has to do with like origin and the source that you talk about all the time. But I feel like you do concentrate more on that. And I, especially over the last few years, I look for a like a mode of behaving in the world. You know what I mean? I want that that guide, you know, that thing that tells me what is right and what is wrong and how I should be interacting in the world. You know, like we were just talking about shame, and you said the difference between shame and guilt. Like that's what I'm interested in. Like when I feel that guilt or that shame, you know, I want to know like the importance of those things and why are certain things right and certain things wrong, you know? That is kind of where I've been, I don't know, the last, at least the last year, you know, for sure. It's just kind of been the area I've living in.
So the way you described it, Kyle, is I agree. That's entirely right. The way that what interests you in the religious pursuit and what interests me in the religious pursuit, I think that religion, the idea of God, surrounds two concepts. The first one is creation. Like, that's what God is, creator. The fact that there's something rather than nothing, that's one. The other one is morality. So people say that because God exists, it implies a morality. It implies it carries with it rules for behavior. And that, for some reason, doesn't interest me as much as the former.
Yeah.
And I see that because one question you asked me one time was, oh, you said, okay, given that, what is your belief when you say you are God? What does that mean for your behavior? You asked me that question. Like, Okay, fine. But what does that mean? And for you, that's what's important. What religion means is how you should behave.
So, I mean, I'm with you in that the creation interests me as well. You know, I want to know that. But I think that, I don't know, I think on some level, I just think I'm never going to know until I'm like incorporated into it in a more complete way than I am now. But I do have, I think the reason that I'm concerned about it is that if we're not concerned about it, we end up in, you know, like doing terrible things, you know?
Yeah.
So
That's fascinated me. That's a question that I've asked myself a lot, that if we're not involved in it, we'll end up doing terrible things. And it's very much a question of morality, and I don't know if I'm educated or articulate enough to bring it into forum, what my inner thoughts are around it. The Old Testament to me and the Ten Commandments are written to the ego. And if we look at the time that surrounded 600 BC, when the Babylonians came out of Mesopotamia, and they were very hedonistic in nature, then there was a tablet delivered for them as a moral code for how to live your life.
mm-hmm.
And it was very much, in my perspective, theologists could wrap me down. I'm not a theologist. I'm very new to biblical studies. And for me, the Old Testament is written to try and tame the ego of man in that hedonistic way that it was 600 BC. Mm-hmm. Yet when the disciples said to Jesus, which one of the 10 commandments should I live my life by? Jesus said, none, they're all shite. I give you one commandment to rule over all commandments. I give you the commandment of love. Yes. And if you were in your heart, would you steal? Would you kill? Would you covet another man's wife? No, because love disempowers the ego, because shame and love can't live in the same room. And I question what we're saying. All demonic forces want to be released back to the light. I think that everybody wants to be forgiven completely with no judgment. I think that we do want to be released from the prison that we've incarcerated ourselves in. And I bring a terrible example, but Portugal created a drugs policy in 2004, which saw 64% less deaths. So what actually causes us to act out? Is it the fact that we want retribution, and when there's something that we want to push against? You know, like you go to Amsterdam, it's all the stupid tourists that go and smoke dope consistently and go to the red light district. Mm-hmm. Yet the people that actually live there might have a joint on a Thursday night or whatever, and that's it. They don't do it all the time. When it's available, it's the fact that it's wrong that makes us compulsed to go and do it. Why? Because shame is more addictive than any illegal drug on the planet. Right? So if there wasn't any shame around about what we do, would we need a code to live by, and would we be doing destructive things? No, the only reason we're doing destructive things is because shame is the most addictive, in my opinion, substance on this planet. And we're going to keep doing behaviors in order for us to be shame-based. Put $1,000 on a race and lose it. You come out, what's the feeling? Shame.
Yes.
You've been sober for 20 years. You go out and get absolutely kindled up on the liquor. Before you've even opened your eyes, what's the very first thing you feel? Shame. What's the very first thing you do? Have another drink. Because of our own repetition compulsion disorder, what we do is we think the thing that put it there will actually release us from the compulsion, and it gives us a moment of freedom, but all of a sudden the walls just close in round about us again. So I've not got an answer, but I question that fact that, well, would we be out of control? I don't know. It's so interesting. But the minute that they decriminalised all drugs in Portugal, less people used them, and more people are surviving and not dying.
Mm-hmm. It's a very libertarian thing you just said, Ross. It's a relatively right-wing thought that you just had.
Whoa!
The idea of decriminalizing drugs, and prostitution for that matter, making those less appealing and less a problem by opening up, by making it legal. That's an argument that it's a libertarian argument, that one of those things that when Kyle was bringing up the anarcho-capitalism, that I still think it holds a lot of weight, that you decriminalize drugs and you'll see less abuse of drugs.
I do think that it would take a number of generations to melt down the unconscious bias to make it safe, though. I don't think you would see it in your lifetime. I think it would take a number of lifetimes in order for the unconscious bias that's still hooked into the shame and almost wired into the encoding of the framework. So I think it's helpful in this, but I think that, I think at the core, all people act out in order to be caught and they want to be forgiven. But we don't. We incarcerate them and we blame them and we shame them. And then they come out and just do the behavior over and over again because somewhere that demonic force wants to be released back to the light. Maybe that's just in my head. I've got no place for that. Just
yeah. Well, listen, we're running out of time. I got one thing. Well, I don't want to listen. I feel like I've been monopolizing this conversation too much. Anything that you want to talk about, or you want to talk about before I throw this on you?
No, if there's anything you would,
No, I'm just so pleased to have spent. Has that been 2 hours?
Almost
2 hours on the Two Tongues podcast in Ohio, Cleveland, from Scotland. Amazing.
Well, listen, man, we're super grateful that you came. This has been one of the most fun conversations we've had in a long time.
I do think that just because you're not here in person doesn't mean we can't do this anymore either.
Yeah, we can do this.
I'll fly back and forward. I like it.
We can do this electronically. We just have to figure out the time zone issues and coordinate. But honestly, we did that with Daniel all the time. Yeah.
We'll make it work. We'll have a giggle.
Yes,
Good.
sir.
All right, so here we go. Here's something that I've been thinking about recently, and I haven't had a chance to think about it, so I want to try to do that with you guys, and you tell me what you think. So there's this idea that we accept in modern science that says something like this. There are fundamental laws behind reality that control how reality is, right? So the galaxies and the stars and the gravity and everything, the biochemistry, everything that exists because there are certain laws that govern or limit what is possible. Can we agree on that? So the fundamental laws of physics, they somehow constrain what is possible. And then I was thinking about DNA, how it formed, right? So here's the idea. Before life, there was a primordial soup. That's what they call it. The primordial oceans were a primordial soup of chemicals and whatever, energy and chemicals, and were formed mix attached to some magical thing. They would describe it as being random.
Yeah.
Conditions were right for the random thing to happen, and suddenly proteins exist where they never did before.
Conditions are perfect.
Conditions are perfect. That's an inside joke we'll tell you about. So that happens, and then some other miracle like this happens, where the proteins that are floating around now in the soup somehow bind together to form strands of proteins, and that's the birth of DNA. And at some point, that it all launches from there. And I was thinking about this. Science tells you that this is random, that there's this element of chaos in the world. And so random shit happens. And sometimes those random things are beneficial. That's how they explain evolution. And this is the same process with the formation of DNA. And then I thought to myself, what about those laws behind the scenes that constrain what's possible? Those physical laws. And now those physical laws are something that is hard for me to separate from the idea of God, by the way. Right? God,
I think it's impossible.
Right? God must somehow be responsible for the laws that limit the potential of being. And here's the idea. What if those laws, or God, or whatever the structure or order is that I'm trying to call God right now, what if it's that the DNA was following? That is the law that it's following when it binds together to become DNA. So here's the idea. It's like proteins couldn't help but become DNA. They didn't have any other choice. The laws of physics, the laws of nature, the order that's imposed upon being was such that proteins would form from the soup, and then from the proteins, DNA would form. They're following an ordered process. That there is no choice. DNA must become, or proteins must become DNA. What do you think of that? Like things are the way they are because they must be. It's not random. It's not an accident of nature that things happen, that things change. I think that whatever God is something like transformation. It's that fractal thing that's always changing. And I just wonder if it's guided by the order that's imposed on it, that order I call God. I don't know. I don't exactly know what I'm saying, but what do you think I'm saying?
I don't know why really, but for some reason it calls to mind, the transcendental argument for God, TAG.
Tell me.
It's the idea that for anything to exist, for there to be anything physical, anything, ethereal, anything like that, it has to be grounded in God. Like people will use math to prove God, and the fact that math exists at all is the proof of God. Because if it was all just random, there would not be math, and people look for proof of God, and the proof is that that it's here, and that I don't know, something about that seems to go hand in hand with like it didn't have what you're saying, that there was no other option, that it had to have happened. I don't know why. I don't really know what the connection is there, but it made me think of that.
It's something like fate, something like it being inevitable that makes me connect it back to the idea of God. I don't know. I'm struggling with it right now myself. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, Ross?
Mm-hmm. My mind went to thinking that that's the beautiful thing about God, is that you can actually make anything fit anything. We can make it, we can look at maths to make maths fit into, but is that us just looking down endless holes instead of just accepting that it is? And is any of that real? Or is it? I think that for me in the last 5 years, I've come to think for me that I wasn't born into this world. I've came to hold a belief that this world was born into me.
Yes.
So it's almost like I don't think I die and go anywhere. I think this body just melts and I'm just in the same place I've always been. My soul is in the same, my soul doesn't move. So again, is it back to the argument that our own arrogance as humans to believe that we're the top of the pyramid, that we're the top of the food chain, that we've got to go somewhere? But what if that somewhere's already here and we can't experience until this singularity drops? So all of those potentials and possibilities are all happening out there. And you could make maths fit that God exists, or you could make that the proteins had to happen because of the laws that govern them. But there are no laws when you drop backwards and drop inwards. For you will enter the narrow gate through the wide gate,
right,
into the kingdom of heaven.
Right.
So when we drop back into the kingdom of heaven, anything is possible and everything is possible.
Yes.
And miracles can occur.
Yes.
So instead of looking at it out there where proteins are following the natural law, and I totally agree, yeah, that's possibly true, and maths can equate that God exists and that nothing's random. But that's all happening out there. Instead of us actually looking at it from a bottom-up model, instead of looking at it top-down.
No, I feel like you just brought your experience from India to bear on this conversation. That's what it sounds like. I have this friend on Twitter that I talk to, David Kolb is his name. He spent a bunch of time in India, and he tells me this all the time. He says, when I try to talk to him about like being and non-being, I have this sort of, you've heard me try to conceptualize the world as a reality is being composed of these two, being and non-being. And he'll always tell me like, non-being, what you're describing as non-being isn't God. God is beyond even that. God is beyond even that. And he just continues to like challenge me to think about it like that. More abstract. God is more abstract even than this idea of non-being. I don't know where I was going with that. Just popped in my head. This is an association.
Well, as you said that there, I was thinking about the podcast that you did so many millennium ago around about Freya saying that God was created by the angels. And then there's, looking behind that and then behind that.
Yes.
Is there a God of God? Does
Yes.
God worship gods?
Yeah.
Does God have a God? And, if like all this stuff that we've been talking about, Jordan Peterson, Jung, and it's all about integrating the shadow.
Yes.
Then I just wish God would integrate his and release us from suffering.
Do that. Do you remember last episode I said, did we give God a shadow? Do you remember we were talking about
have we given that?
Have we given God a Jungian shadow?
Absolutely.
We created the devil. We did. We
did.
separated that idea from God. We gave God a Jungian shadow just like we have.
Absolutely. But yes, but did God make the world or did the world make God? Or are we getting back? It's so difficult to attempt to bring these conversations, which are multidimensional conversations, into a 2 or 3 dimensional forum. It's really, really, that's, I think, what we're all trying to do. I think that's what the three of us here are trying desperately to bring that into this 2 or 3 dimensional world. It's the things that we think we own actually own us. So, is God just a blank canvas that's acting out the holographic projection that we put upon it, which is Freud's theory of transference, Jung's theory of transference? Are we just transferring our duality onto God, and that battle, between God and the devil? So if God has got a shadow, then why is God not willing to integrate it? So rather than you contacting Jordan Peterson or Joe Rogan, just contact God and we'll get him on the podcast.
Which is as good a place as any to end. We'll get God on the podcast.
I do have one last question. Will you listen to this one?
Good question.
Good question, Kyle.
Because we mentioned last night that Chris goes back and listens to his, and it causes him to think new things about the content.
Yes.
I don't listen to any of them. I literally don't listen to any of the podcasts.
Okay.
Mainly because I don't like hearing my own voice.
Okay. So that's a fantastic. Thank you. Honesty.
Yeah,
right?
It's 100%.
Okay. So I was sitting with a couple of girlfriends that I have back home, and I said to them just in the last week, I went, so I was telling them I was coming to see you, and I was fantasizing about getting a picture with you and just doing that. And I was unable to look at a picture of myself, see myself in a video, or hear my dulcet tones up until 5 years ago. I was not able to do that. And if you look at the trajectory, if you were able to look at the timeline on Facebook, Twitter, where we self-identify these days, I would have had a profile picture of a vehicle or a motorcycle or a hill up until 5 years ago. I've only been able to look at myself in the last 5 years. So to answer your question, I would be able to listen to it back. I would possibly ask myself which aspect of me was listening to it before I did. but I would have no problem hearing myself now in comparison to where I was. So for you to say you don't listen to it because you don't want to hear yourself, I can very much relate to that from, 5 years gone.
Yeah.
So I could listen to it, but I would be curious which aspect of me was listening to it. And perhaps listening to it, but I would never know, would keep those endorphins either going, or they would try and bring this experience into a box, which, if I'm being honest, we've always got an agenda, right? And I don't think there's such a thing as philanthropy that we don't give for free.
Mm-hmm.
But I desperately want to be able to give for free. I desperately want to be able to do that. I think that that's impossible, because we're always getting something back because there is an exchange. This particular relationship, because it's new and virgin, I want it to grow exponentially, and perhaps listening to it might limit it in some kind of way. But I wouldn't have an issue listening to it now. I would have done 5 years ago. I wouldn't have been here 5 years ago. But, so that's a long, Scottish, drawn-out way of answering your very simple question. Holding on to the final moments of the Two Tongue podcast and thinking we should do a 12-hour
marathon.
Listen, the best part of this is we get to listen to the outro music together live in person.
Listeners, you've no idea.
Kyle, you want to hit the button? The purple button at the bottom?
Purple button at the bottom.
Well, there you have it. That's one avenue explored, but infinitely more still to go. I hope you enjoyed thinking along with us.
I know. It's not easy work. Thinking.
It's hard and full of uncertainties, but I'm grateful for the company as we trek through this together.
Here's hoping that the juice is worth the squeeze.
See what I did there?
I still want to know what you did there.
In the next episode.
All right, you can stop that one and then the other one.
Stop them both.